we're standing in right now is a chaparral stand called a Ceanothus chaparral type. And what I have here and behind is Ceanothus verrucosus, otherwise known as warty stem ceanothus, which is named for the little bumps on the stems. And what's really interesting about this stand is it's 10 years old, and every Ceanothus shrub here is exactly the same age, because 10 years ago there was a fire, and that fire scarified or changed the seeds in a way that allowed them to germinate with the next rain. And that's what's interesting about Ceanothus. All Ceanothus shrubs, and there's quite a few varieties and species, they require heat for their seeds to germinate. And if a fire came through here right now, the chances are the system would not recover as well as it would have been otherwise had the stand been older, say 20 years. Because when the fire comes through, two things are going out against the Ceanothus. Number one, there's really not enough vegetation or fuel here, believe it or not, to create the hot fire that a Ceanothus chaparral stand needs for its seeds to properly germinate. If the fire is too cool, the seed coats do not crack properly, and so there's not a sufficient recovery time for the Ceanothus shrubs. Secondly, if it's only been 10 years since the last fire, there's really not enough seed in the ground itself, as a seed bank we call it, to allow the system to recover. So you've got those two things working against you at younger age stands under 10 years. And 10 years is really the bare minimum. What you'd really like to have is a 20-year or older stand, and that pretty much guarantees you're going to have a proper seed bank and enough fuel in the system to create the heat to crack those seeds. Part of the chaparral story is succession. The first 2 years after a fire, you usually get a flush of magnificent wildflowers, herbaceous growth, plants without any woody stems that cover the landscape if there's enough rain. But in the background, the shrubs are starting to resprout, some of them that have the capability of doing that. And a lot of the species of shrubs regenerate from seeds. And the seeds crack with the heat, allowing water to get into them. And as they grow slowly, then after about 3 or 4 years, they start to dominate the scene until after about 10, you actually can have a closed canopy all over again. And so that's stage 1 of the recovery process. Stage 2 is as time goes on, some of the plants like Ceanothus will eventually drop out, primarily because of drought, sometimes age, and then the other shrubs that are in the system, some of the resprouters, manzanitas, things like that, they'll start dominating until after 100 years or so, you've got a beautiful old-growth stand of chaparral. They have shrubs with trunks the size of people's waists. They reach up to 20 feet high. Very few old-growth stands left anymore because, unfortunately, there are just too many fires. Not all chaparral is the same. There's many types. It's not just an amorphous mass of green that's covering the hillsides. And every chaparral type has its own special texture, its own species mix, and even at some point varieties that people don't suspect are there because they just see green. The stand we're in right now is Ceanothus chaparral. And when you look at it from a distance, it has sort of a fine coating to it, almost as if they're little threads. And that's really the first stage of a chaparral stand after a fire, because Ceanothus is one of the key species that responds to fire cues as seeds themselves. Because chaparral is usually named by the dominant species. So, for example, this is Ceanothus chaparral, because almost 90% of the cover is Ceanothus.